Hello everyone. Leave This Chanting is one of the most popular poems by Rabindranath Tagore, which is consisted in his collection of poetry called Gitanjali, the work which won him the Nobel Prize for Literature. Tagore lived between the years 1861 to 1941. He was educated at home, and although at the age of 17 he was sent to England for formal schooling, he did not finish his studies there. Therefore, he did not attain a formal degree. But this fact did not deter Tagore to get indulged in a lot of literary activities, and in his later years he managed the family estate, a project which brought him into close touch with humanity and increased his interest in social reforms. So, at this backdrop, Tagore also started an experimental school called Chanting, where he tried to implement Upanishadic ideals of education. He also participated in India's freedom movement. And also, Mahatma Gandhi was one of the most devoted friends of Tagore. Tagore achieved early success as a writer in his native language, Bengali. As his works were gaining recognition all around the world, a lot of translations were attempted and he became rapidly known all across the world, and the Nobel Prize added to his fame. Tagore also attempted to write across all literary genres, but he was primarily a poet, writing more than 50 odd volumes of poetry. And of course, Gitanjali was his most famous, and it also gave him the Nobel Prize for Literature, and he became the first ever non-European to win that Nobel Prize for Literature. Moving on to the poem, Leave This Chanting. So the title of this poem was not specifically designed, it was just taken from the first few words, the first line of the poem, that is, leave this chanting and singing and telling of beads. So leave this chanting was simply taken from the first line, and this poem consists of 16 lines and most of them are in couplets. So the poem does not have any special format or structure, but just most of the lines are in couplets. And also the language is very simple and very easy to understand, and it also does not have any complex concepts or any jargons, so that people of any background can read this and easily understand its meaning. Now let's start a line by line analysis of the poem. So the poet begins by telling that leave this chanting and singing and telling of beads. So the speaker seems to be the poet himself, and he is asking someone to stop chanting. So who are the people who generally continuously chant with having beads in between their fingers? Okay, they are obviously the people who indulge themselves in incessant prayer and who call themselves to be very holy. So the people who believe in spirituality completely. So the poet seems to be addressing these group of people, and he is asking them to stop doing their chanting. Whom dost thou worship in this lonely dark corner of a temple with doors all shut? So he is telling these people that God is not present in some dark corner in a temple. So God cannot be in such a brooding and dark place. So he is telling these people who are praying that it is of no use in praying in such an environment. And he is asking them to open thine eyes and see thy God is not before thee. So he is asking them to open their eyes and see if the God they are praying to is really in front of them or not. So where is the God? So Tagore gives a reply that he is there where the tiller is tilling the hard ground and where the path maker is breaking stones. So God seems to be with the tiller and the path maker. Why? Because they are the people who toil very hard and work day and night just for the sake of one good meal. They do not have any long set goals or ambitions. All their dreams are very simple and they are only concerned of where their next meal comes from. So such struggling people are the ones who always have God's strength and his support. And also God is with them both in sun and in shower. So he is always with them. He is ever present only with these toiling men who work really hard just to make their families happy and not for their own selves, just to make their loved ones happy. And so his garment is covered with dust. So, since God is there with these men who are doing a very hardcore physical labor, even God's own garment is getting covered with dust. So, people consider themselves, these people who indulge in prayers, they consider themselves to be very divine, pure, and holy, but God Himself is covered with dust. So, that shows how ironical the people are and how paradoxical the situation is. So, these holy people are not really pristine if they do not work hard for the sake of others. So, these people are simply being selfish, is what the poet is trying to tell. Further, the poet tells, "Put off thy holy mantle, and even like him, come down on the dusty soil." So, the poet commands these people to cast their holy mantle off. So, holy mantle is a kind of clothing that is worn by these people who have offered themselves in service of God. So he is asking, the poet is asking them to just throw aside these holy mantle and like God come down along with all these other toiling men and work in the dusty soil. So that is what the poet is asking these people to do. Come out of thy meditations and leave aside thy flowers and incense. So, further, he is commanding them to just quit their meditations and to just, stop all their religious offerings that they do for the God. So, these people, when they pray, they usually offer flowers and other kinds of things as just to make God to do the things that they wish for. So that is more like a bargain, and that is not a pure worship. So the poet is telling them to stop all these kinds of so-called religious offerings. What harm is there if thy clothes become tattered and stained? So, further, holiness is not in the clothes, it is not in the appearance. So, holiness can only be looked at inside a person. So, only if you're holy inside, then only it really counts. So, the poet is asking that, telling that there is no harm in getting your clothes tattered or dusty, because clothes are not really important when it comes to being holy. And finally, he says, "Meet him and stand by him in toil and in sweat of thy brow." So, the purpose of these holy people and the purpose of their prayers is to seek God's deliverance, that is, the liberation of the soul from the constant and never ending cycle of birth and death. So, just to get salvation, these people are constantly in prayer. So, the poet is trying to tell that God is not someone who is inside these kinds of temples or in holy places. To seek God's blessings, all these meditation and all these ritualistic flowers and other things are not needed. But the man should learn it the hard way to seek and find the truth of God in the reality, so among the real world. So God does not listen to the prayers of a man who is inside a dark room and praying alone, because God is with the poor man who is working very hard day and night. So true religion also consists in love for fellow humanity and also in lending a helping hand to these people. So Tagore believes in the simple truth of serving man in order to serve God. So concern for fellow humans ultimately leads men to the realization of God. So that is the idea that is conveyed in this poem. So, the important points that are covered in this poem is that the poet tries to reject the ascetic way of life, and he stresses the importance of loving fellow human beings. And also he touches upon the concept of God's deliverance, that salvation can be attained only when a man toils in the real world and when he faces real life problems and difficulties. So that is the only way to attain God's blessing. So, just simply sitting alone away from the rest of the world, thinking of God does not really help, is what the poet is trying to tell. And divinity resides in fellow human beings and also in nature, and not in singing and chanting mantras. And finally, the ultimate crux of the poem is the importance of humanity. So, how it is very important to respect fellow human beings and have compassion towards them. So, Tagore feels that practicing humanity can be the highest form of worship. So, this is all the poem is about, and I hope you understood the poem. If there are any doubts or comments, you can leave them in the comment section below. Thank you.